And it really does function in many ways quite a bit like SourceForge. So there's a catalogue with all sorts of different categories. There are, at the moment, something like 3,200 biological parts. So when I say biological part, I just mean a DNA sequence of some kind, contributed by more than 100 groups. Depends a little bit on how you count these things, but those are kind of ballpark figures. And you can just go through and search, and there's all kinds of information and annotation available. But one of the most the most significant single thing, I mean, you click through, and what you get is this: TTATGACAA, blah, 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 blah. What does that mean? It's the DNA base pairs. And what you can do, in principle, and people do this, is you can download it. You can synthesize the life form. Actually, typically people don't do that in their own labs. They send away. You can do it. It depends on the length, but you can do it. If it's not too long, you can do it. I think it's 50 cents a base pair at the moment. But the virus is 10,000 base pairs. So, whatever, that's $5,000. It's not that much money. So you can, if you like, improve and alter that life form, and you can upload the result. And people do it a lot. I mean, a surprising amount. I should mention, this is kind of an aside, but it's kind of hard to put these things together, or a priori it's hard to put these things together. So there's all kinds of interesting sort of thinking and about standardization to make it easier to combine parts. I don't really understand all that so well, but it's an important problem. I'll just give you an example. They run a competition called iGEM every year, where what they actually do. It's interesting. By having this kind of open source approach, it makes it very easy to get into biology, because you can reuse what everybody else has done, and you're sort of starting from that point. And so they run a competition where they bring undergraduates from around the world to MIT called iGEM. And, well, basically, there's a big prize that goes to whoever synthesizes the coolest thing. So last year there was a team from Slovenia. And just to give you, this is sort of just an example. There are dozens or hundreds of interesting projects. They found a vaccine against this bacteria, which is apparently, I am told, found in roughly half the world's population. In most people, it doesn't have any effect. But apparently, under sort of the right conditions or the wrong conditions, depending on how you look at it, it can make people susceptible to ulcers and apparently also to some forms of cancer. So it's not something that can be deployed. It's not like it's gone through the FDA or whatever. It's certainly an interesting sort of start down that process, and they contribute these parts back to the registry. I should say, so even while these sort of sequences are getting uploaded to this registry, in fact, much of the development work is also taking place in the open because of a parallel development, which is called Open Wetware. And basically, what Open Wetware, it started out as MediaWiki, and they've added a whole lot of custom features. They've added some blogging and a bunch of other bits and pieces. It's quite highly customized. And a lot of the groups who are doing this open source synthetic biology are using Open Wetware as a platform for their work. So this is just an example that Peking University actually has been one of the more active iGEM groups, and they have a great set of pages. They do all kinds of stuff. I guess the thing that I enjoy the most in some ways is the brainstorming. So if you go through a lot of the groups, they do brainstorming about what sort of things they want to do, and so you don't sort of see the full thing here. So here's their first idea, which is E. coli to decompose polluted water and sludge, and then there's a link to a PowerPoint file which describes it in much more detail. And you keep sort of going down, and they have all these ideas, and finally they pick one. There's all kinds of stuff like that done there. So essentially what they're doing is they're building an online biological commons with the goal of engineering synthetic biological systems using standard biological parts. And maybe one day, eventually, they'll be able to do, as people do in programming languages, they'll be able to build multiple layers of abstraction. So instead of having to work at the DNA level, sort of the assembly code level, you'll be able to move to higher levels. I think that's a pretty exciting kind of a prospect. Okay, so that's open source biology. I want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about open notebook science, which is another development. It's kind of the most radical in some ways. So the open notebook scientists are people who are systematically attempting to put all of their ideas, scientific ideas, online. They're trying to systematically put all of their data, experimental data, online in as close to real time as possible. I should have said that. That's true also of the ideas. And they're also trying to provide ways then of filtering that, because that's an awful lot of information. It's no good if it's not actually organised in some useful way. So, it's really the fundamental principle here is that the best way to create value in science is to make it easy for others to improve your work, and they can't improve your work if you're not actually sharing it with them. So I'll give you just a few examples. Somebody, in some ways, he's a pioneer of open notebook science, although he didn't call it that, is Garrett Lacey. Garrett's a theoretical physicist. If that name looks familiar, it's not entirely surprising. Garrett actually, I guess a couple of years ago, there was a lot of fuss about Surfer Dude discovers theory of everything. I don't know if any of you remember that, but that's actually Garrett, whose name I have misspelled. Horrible. Missing a T. Anyway, the Surfer Dude discovers theory of everything aside, he's a theoretical physicist, a perfectly normal one. And one of the interesting things that he's done for several years, is he's maintained this wiki where he just, as he works through stuff, he uploads it to the wiki. You can sort of see him working through. He's understanding all these different topics. He's brainstorming ideas and so on and so forth. Garrett has called it My Brain Online. So that's sort of one example. There's a chemist, Jean-Claude Bradley, who actually coined the term open notebook science and has been one of the people who's really systematically sort of pursued the idea and developed it. And so this is his useful chemistry page. It links to all kinds of different things. So there's a blog, there's a mailing list, there's a molecules blog with all sorts of different ways of searching through it. You just kind of keep on going. They have their experimental plans. They have, you can just, the amount of information that they're putting online is quite amazing, and they're finding ways to federate it in ways which are useful for other people. It's quite interesting, actually, to go through and see what Google searches come up most frequently. You'd be surprised. There are some complicated molecules whose names I can't pronounce, which are surprisingly frequently searched. Cameron Nalon is another person who's doing it, also a chemist. So they're experimenting with ideas like lab equipment that automatically posts to the web. In fact, they're very interested in things like robots that do experiments. The reason why it's interesting to have robots that do experiments is because you can then open source the code that's used to control the robot, or you can, in fact, open source the description, the hardware as well, potentially. So you can really make your experiment very reproducible in this way and very, very open. They're very interested in things like machine-readable data, which should enable data mining and all kinds of automated inference one day. That, by the way, I should say that, at least certainly my sense is that this kind of idea of making data machine-readable and then doing automated inference has a bit of a bad name. This idea of the semantic web has been around for a long time, and a lot of people poo-poo the idea. Science is very interesting in that you have these small communities of people